Hey, it's Carrie Flatlight here for Friday Fire, first one of the Roaring 20s. And I've been away for a little while over Christmas, just taking a break and getting some R&R, so we are ready to rock. And I wanted to talk about closing day and all the things that can go so very wrong on closing day when you're buying or selling a house. And it's funny because it's another one of those things that nobody ever talks about in real estate. And then when something bad happens, everyone has a heart attack and it's dramatic and people are upset and there's tears and anger and arguing. And so I'm going to talk about what closing day actually is behind the scenes, what's really happening contractually on closing day. And then I'm going to touch on some of the things that can go wrong. And it really is your realtor's job, your mortgage broker's job, your lawyer's job, and your job as the client to plan ahead for closing day. So what doesn't happen on closing day is we don't have a bunch of cash under a mattress somewhere or sitting in a pile in a vault at the bank, and then we don't take the bag of money and go give it to the seller. But I think sort of symbolically people kind of expect that to happen and that it's really that simple, and it is not. So in your purchase contract, and please read your purchase contract and go over it with your realtor in detail when you're making an offer, but in your purchase contract, the standard form in Alberta says, that the seller will provide vacant possession of the property on this day, usually at noon on closing day. And that's really important to remember. So what does that actually mean? Does that mean when you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning on closing day, when you're supposed to move into your house, that you just get in your moving truck and drive up to the house at 7 o'clock in the morning with your cup of coffee, your 3 kids in the back seat, and all of your worldly possessions and just start moving in? No. That is not what happens. And I don't care what they show on TV. That is not what happens. And legally, it cannot happen. So you actually do not own or have a right to possession of the house until the money has moved from the buyer's lawyer, your lawyer, to the seller's lawyer. And if you really think about that, because we're not moving a big bag of money, nobody's walking a bag full of money, think about all of the things that have to happen to move hundreds of thousands of dollars to the seller's lawyer. So let's back up the moving truck here a couple of weeks. Once conditions come off, so most home buyers in Lethbridge anyway, on a conventional purchase, will put a home inspection condition and a financing condition on the offer to purchase, sometimes subject to sale of home, a third condition, sometimes some other conditions like I want my mom's best friend's cousin to come and see the house and say that she approves before I remove conditions, whatever. So once conditions are removed and the buyer has satisfied the buyer's conditions, and then the sale goes final, no money has moved yet aside of deposit monies and things like that. Okay, maybe some repairs that the seller did or whatever was negotiated. The money is contracted to move by noon on closing day. So the seller's lawyer needs to have that money in their possession via wire transfer. There's all kinds of things that go on with the banks. So your mortgage broker has to send mortgage instructions to the lawyer so that they know what to do with the bank. Like there's all kinds of things that have to go on behind the scenes. Paperwork, there's protocols that the lawyers use, all of these things. And so I have seen a late closing where the seller didn't get paid on time on closing day by noon because there was a typo in the instructions to the bank on the name of the seller's lawyer. Like, this is the kind of thing that can hold up closing, and there's buyers with a moving truck and all their stuff, and they can't get into the house. So that's just one example. What if the buyer sits down with their lawyer, let's say 4 days before closing, which is common. The buyer has to go see the lawyer and sign the line transfer and do a bunch of things before closing day. What if they sit down with their lawyer and they review the real property report for the house they're buying, because that's what they have to do. The lawyer has to review that with the buyer, make sure everybody's happy with it. And the garage that the seller built is not on the real property report, and nobody thought to look at that or talk about that back when the house was listed. Or there's some other wonky thing going on with the property that is not correctly reflected in the survey and the compliance letter from the city of Lethbridge. Do you think that the buyer's lawyer might have a concern before releasing money to the seller's lawyer about that real property report? Yes, they will. So then we have a situation where now the two lawyers have to figure out a solution. It could take 6 weeks to get a new real property report and compliance letter if it's busy and it's springtime. But closing day is 4 days away. What are you going to do? And it's a common one. And then the buyer's lawyer might want to hold back all kinds of money before anything can go forward, right? So there's just so many things that can go wrong, and they can be big things or little things. But anything that holds up the way that money moves on closing day is going to create a problem. So I always warn my buyer clients, we always say, look, the contract says that we get vacant possession by 12 noon on closing day. However, things happen. So we cannot guarantee that the keys to that home will be releasable by noon. And if they're not, for one of many, many reasons that could happen, we can't just let you into the house because you don't own the house yet. It's not your house until the money moves and the seller's lawyer says, release keys, the buyer can take possession. Now, that being said, more often than not, if there's some kind of minor delay and the seller's lawyer is confident that the buyer will be able to complete that closing and within a reasonable time frame, sometimes they can do what's called a tenancy at will. So a tenancy at will means, okay, we're going to let the buyer move in, we're going to let them take possession, we're going to release keys because they have a moving truck with 3 kids and all their worldly possessions sitting down the street waiting and they have nowhere to go. Then the buyer can move in, but they don't actually own the house yet. And there's fees involved so that they can live in the house, depending on whose fault it was that the closing is late. So if the seller can't close, the seller has to pay some fees. And then if the buyer can't close, the buyer has to pay fees. And there's interest calculations to do with the mortgage and all these kinds of things. More often than not, tenancy at will is usually a very, very short-term thing, like just for a day or two, or say it's like a Friday afternoon and for some reason there was a delay in closing. Well, you can't close on a Saturday, Sunday, so we'll give the buyers vacant possession, let them take tenancy at will, and then we'll close on Monday, so that we can get the buyers into the home over the weekend. But all parties have to agree. The buyer's lawyer and the seller's lawyer have to work that out, and there's all kinds of paperwork and things that have to happen. The whole point of this is to say closings are complicated. There's a million things that can go wrong. You need to make sure that you have a very proactive realtor, mortgage professional, because funding is one of the biggest delays at closing, is funding, delays in funding. And that your lawyers are on top of things. Having a responsive lawyer is so important. Everybody needs to be ready for that closing and have their phone on for those couple of days. Delays in funding happen often because if there's not enough time or, between condition removal and closing day. So usually we need 2 full weeks, sometimes at least 2 weeks between condition removal and closing day for mortgage instructions to happen and the banks and the lawyers to get everything lined up. You can't just remove conditions and then move in the next day. It's just not going to happen. So those are just some of the things. I might do 1 or 2 more Friday Fire episodes to get into the details on some of these individual issues that can hold up closing, because I just can't stress enough, there's so much work for the buyer and the seller that go into making a real estate sale come together. I mean, there's so much work. The buyer is going out looking at homes. They have to get approved for a mortgage. They have to do all of this legwork, paperwork, all of these things. The sellers, invested all this time and effort to get their house ready, put it on the market, have showings. It's very emotionally charged transition for people. And then all of a sudden, closing day, one little thing can go wrong that nobody was anticipating or planning for or trying to prevent. And everybody is just heartbroken and upset because it didn't happen on time. If you have any questions, please post them. I had to post my Friday Fire live to my personal page this time because I was having technical problems with my real estate page. So I'll try and move this video over there, but feel free to post questions in either place. I'll see you on Instagram as well, and have a warm, terrific weekend. Happy 2020. Bye-bye.